Tonight we're going to check out a Gibson from the year 1960. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Now don't get too excited, I don't think anybody's putting a 60 burst in here, but it is a burst in hue. This is an ES-125. Sammy just purchased this guitar and he wanted me to check it out on the show and share it with everybody because he's really excited to have a one pickup archtop guitar. And hey, we might as well learn about these weird little goofy things. So the ES-125 is basically the student model version of an archtop guitar. You gotta remember, these things were all the rage at one point in time before the Les Pauls came around. And there's still a lot of people who enjoy full hollow body guitars. But the ES-125 was offered in so many different variations. So what version is this one? Well, it's got a cutaway, so that's gonna add a C into the title. And it is a thin line design, meaning it's not obnoxiously thick like an ES-295. So that tells us it's an ES-125 TC because we only have one pickup here. If it had two pickups, then you would also have a D within the title as a dual pickup model. But these were introduced all the way back in 1941, but the initial version had a slightly smaller body and only lasted for about 2 model years before being discontinued, and then eventually brought back in 1946. And then we saw various different versions of this all the way until about 1970. So you can find a full-bodied version that just has the one pickup. You can find a full-body dual pickup version. You can also find a full-body one with a cutaway. You can also find the dual pickup version of the cutaway. You can find just the thin line with one pickup. You can find the thin line version with 2 pickups, as well as the one we're documenting today, the thin line cutaway single pickup. Then you can also find the TCD thin line cutaway double pickup. Then don't forget about the 3/4 sized version. So D, C, CD, T, TD, TC, CD, it all gets kind of confusing, but once you understand what they mean, then the titles make more sense. Because not everybody wants a cutaway, so there's a little bit of something for everyone. They were relatively affordable at that time. But most of these things are like a darker, almost tobacco sunburst color. And that's what's cool about this one being 1960, because it's actually a cherry sunburst. And the 60s, they don't fade because the finish was a little bit different, just like the original Les Paul bursts. So it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to see one that's a little bit different than the rest. And it's obviously got some fading to it, but you know, let's just check this out for what it is. I'm not an expert on these, but we've got an old P90, so it can't be that bad. In 2024, these really aren't that expensive, somewhere within the $2,000 to $3,000 range, but yet you can still get all the beautiful finish checking and a vintage Gibson. But straight out of the box, even though it's a thin line, it still has a good amount to it. I mean, it just feels closer to a Les Paul, really, because the top and back are still carved, so even though this is thinner, it's still quite a sizable guitar. But this is also a really inexpensive way to have a real Brazilian rosewood fretboard on a guitar, because that's back when Brazilian was just the standard. It wasn't some super ultra rare tone wood that you had to jump through a lot of hoops to get at that point in time. Let's go ahead and throw this guitar on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs before we get to a playing sample. Inside our friend from 1960, this top is just looking gorgeous. Beautiful cherry sunburst hue, and I'm not normally a big fan of these, but it's more so akin to like heritage cherry sunburst out of the 80s, where it has that really nice dark border before they got really clowny. But you even have like a little bit of figuring within the wood that shows out now. Maybe a little bit of bird's eye and dancing wood grain. But let's check out our P90. They didn't have any markings, you just have to kind of know what to look for, and I'm not necessarily an expert on 50s and 60s P90s. It looks close enough as compared to what I've seen, and it has a nice strong reading, 7.42 k ohms within the circuit. And our cover looks like this, lightly worn. Then we have the UC 451 markings on the inside. Now these utilize a floating bridge system, so I had to tape it down, but we currently have a wooden bridge on it. And it does have 2 thumb wheels, however, I'm going to take them off because I wanted the action just a little bit lower on this, and I think that's going to give us the movement we need before we go shaving anything down. Here's one of our vintage style trapeze tailpieces. This one's got some pretty good patina worked up on it, and it just mounts to the bottom side of the guitar with 2 screws and your strap button. And then here's the sad fate of a lot of these archtops. People will take them, gut the electronics, use them to restore more valuable guitars. Thankfully, these knobs still appear to be original. It's just a master volume and a master tone. I'd say this looks pretty good without a pickguard, but here's a close-up look at it. It is the tortoiseshell color, so the more light that you get underneath it, the more the marbling stands out, but this is real celluloid, so it will bend and warp over time. All things considered, not too bad shape. But it utilizes like a little ebony block spacer right here, since the body slopes down here. Now let's see what we can find with our endoscope. Because the shop this viewer bought it from said they couldn't find a factory order number or serial number. So here's the base of our heel, not seeing anything there. And here's looking towards our strap button. You can see where they've got a block of wood in there, as well as our grounding wire. And over there is our output jack. And here's the bottom side of our pots. They look like they could be the original style because I don't have markings on the bottom. They're going to be on the edge. But my endoscope's not quite good enough to read them. But we do have a R6731. Space 7 over here. But here you can also see some of the top bracing and the bottom side of our maple top. And this is back over by the neck block area. You can see some of the kerfing that they use along the edge, as well as the cutaway over there. So overall, we didn't find anything too crazy in here. But speaking of the cutaway, this is known as the Florentine cut. It's a little bit more exaggerated and pointy over here, whereas the Les Paul style is known as the Venetian. But just like an ES-335, these are crafted the same way. It's a 3-ply maple poplar maple sandwich that they press and then form into the top. The same is also true for the edges and the back. Then this model utilizes a mahogany neck with that rosewood fretboard. These Brazilian boards can get really dark. Like, I would not fault you if you thought this was ebony. That's how nice and black this particular one is. But this was played quite extensively. You've got fret wear pretty much all up and down the thing, some fingernail divoting. I do want to say, when I had the conditioning treatment on this, there's a lot of cool like red streakiness in this board. It all just gets lost because of how dark it's become. But you've got some light chipping of the finish along the edge. And here's a good look at the edge of the fretboard, how it dips down underneath it. And these rock 24 3/4 inch scale lengths. But I measure 1.69 inches at the nut, 2.09 by the 12th. First fret neck depth, quite skinny, 0.8, and 0.88 by the 10th. You know, I never realized just how thin this neck was until I took the measurements, since the body's still pretty chunky as compared to what I normally review. Here's that neck at the 1st fret and the 12th fret. Still nice and rounded, C-shape, it's just rather thin. Moving on to the face of the headstock. First off, our truss rod. Everything looks good there. Plenty of life left. And no fancy model markers on the headstock. Just lots of nice finish checking and our Gibson decal logo. Our truss rod cover is just 1-ply black. Nothing too fancy. Can't really tell top from bottom. All strung up again. What was the final verdict? I thought it was strange when I first unboxed it. This thing was flying about in the case, even though the bridge was all taped down. But now I realize why it is. Somebody had previously removed that thumb wheel because this does play okay just like that. But you need just a hair over here. Like, you could get away with half of that. Because it plays great until like right here where everything starts to fret out if you just run it completely bare without thumb wheels. So I'll let the owner of this decide what he wants to do when he gets it. Moving on to the back now, it's such a dark cherry. I just love the wood that they used back here. It's looking pretty sweet. But what's really surprising here is, you know, from 1960, this thing is in great shape despite being played as much as it was on the frets. Like, you got a small ding right here, but there's not like buckle worming or anything. I mean, you might have a little bit, but it's mainly just finish checking as to be expected with the age of this. And like a little patch of wear back here. I'm sure most of that would polish off. Here's a look at our sharp pointy cutaway and some of the character that we've got on the edges. Looks like maybe a small crack by the output jack. And here's the other side. And now let's check on our neck. Always like the way these cherries fade on the neck from playing it, because it kind of creates that bursted effect that they then later used in the 70s on cherry sunburst colors. I wonder if this is where they got that idea from, to go from red to yellow on the necks. But we've got a little bit of ring wear on the back, but mainly just finish checking. And then it looks like we're still rocking the original 3-in-a-line tuners. Not as good as a modern tuner, but they also have a lot of age to them. All said and done, it weighs about 5 pounds. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this jazz box sounds. nice dark vintage tone to it. I like it. When you roll that tone down just a couple of notches, it gives you a really nice thump sound. And yes, it will feedback. Now I'll kick on some distortion. Yes, you get feedback. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage though, like infinite sustain on this one. You can tell this P90 is really good, but you know, being in the neck position, there's only so much you can get out of it. Like, you really want it in the bridge position for like you're really rocking out stuff, but it's got some really nice solo licks. Got an interesting harmonic ring out thing. Very space-like. There's no effects added there. And don't forget, it's still an acoustic guitar as well. There we go, a circa 1960 ES-125. What are my final thoughts? I didn't really know what to expect going into this. I've had a few of these vintage arch tops and thin lines before, but I haven't had one in a while, and it really just makes you think about playing the guitar differently. So even though this might not be what you think you want to play, maybe pick one of these up if you're just kind of stuck in a rut and need some inspiration. This thing was making me think about guitar a little bit differently, and you know, the fact that it's got a lot of history even before when I got it just makes you slightly in awe of the instrument. And while these things are still certainly expensive guitars, it's nowhere near what a Burst would run ya, or even a Les Paul Jr. I mean, you're talking like $3,000-ish here for something similar to what we documented today. So in many ways for me, that's great because I'm not scared to hammer away at this. It's not a rare collectible. It's just something that could give you inspiration that's readily available on the market at any given time. But I'm just really digging this back in this lighting situation. But all right, Troglodytes, I need to get this one sent off to Sammy. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.